Everything I am, I'm not, kind of. And that's the way it is with all people if they really observe themselves.
And you've referenced a few times in this interview talking about how the interviews you've done, things have been misunderstood, things have been taken that you've said and changed. I mean, do you feel generally misunderstood? Do you feel like
I don't go around feeling misunderstood, but
do you feel like others misunderstand?
Oh, constantly. But I don't go around feeling misunderstood.
What does that mean, you don't go around?
Well, I don't hold on to it. I go out, I'm misunderstood. You know, I see a butterfly, I go for a swim. I go out, I'm misunderstood. You know, I take a drive in my car. You know, somebody comes over, I'm misunderstood. But I don't, you know.
You've learned to shake it off.
Well, usually I'm like, we've been working to try and get, I'm trying to get clear. Like Wayne Shorter, okay? People say, oh, nobody can understand what Wayne's saying. And then his wife and people say, you can understand what Wayne's saying. Yeah. I said, well, I think so. But he'll do to me what I do. He'll say something and I'll paraphrase and he'll go, no, because in my paraphrasing, I have misdirected the target ever so slightly. Yeah. I almost get what he's saying, but not quite.
I love that we've been doing that here. I mean, if the theme is you're constantly misunderstood, what is the greatest misconception about Joni Mitchell?
Well, okay, I'll give you a greatest misconception. Oh, there's so many. If I made a list of the things I've been likened to and gave it to you and you didn't know who it was about, you're just like the singing nun, you're just like Marilyn Monroe, you're just like Mick Jagger. Joni, you're like Mick Jagger, Richard Nixon and Gomer Pyle rolled into one. You look like Greta Garbo, you look like an embryo, you look like, if you saw...
An embryo?
Well, if I went into this long description, you look like a puppet. You look like of all these things, both yin and yang, and male and female, and the list is, and say, okay, this person was described this way. Who is this person? You never know, and you're going, God, it's just, whatever it is that's triggering the you're just like, is in the individual's head, whatever it is that they're seeing. And Moran Beatty said fame is a series of misunderstandings surrounding a name. I don't know whether that was his thought or he's quoting somebody on that, but it stands as...
I'd run with the Garbo. Yes, I'm just like Greta Garbo.
I met the guy that hollered out, I put it on a record, Joni, you're just like Richard Nixon, Gomer Pyle and Mick Jagger rolled into one. Years later, I met him at Studio 54, and he came up and he said, I'm the guy that said that. I said, oh, I always wanted to ask you, are you just like Mick Jagger, Gomer Pyle, and Richard Nixon rolled into one? He said, yes. I said, I thought so. Because people tend to project, their trip onto you, especially if they don't have self-knowledge, and most of them don't. So you really, to be famous, you really have to know who you are, because you're getting this barrage of, mislabeling and, stuff coming at you.
Can I ask you about your relationship to some of your songs, especially the big songs that people think of back to the 70s and the 80s and Joni Mitchell in the late 60s for that matter. And when I interviewed Leonard Cohen a couple of years ago, we talked about how he's almost grown into his songs. That the songs that he wrote when he was 30 years old are more appropriate for him now than when he actually wrote them. It's quite remarkable. In your case, it almost feels like the inverse. You said, I feel miscast now in my early songs.
Well, not both sides now. Both sides now I grew into.
But you redid both sides now.
Right.
And was that why?
Well, it's not an ingenue. It's not a good ingenue role. I saw Mabel Mercer do it in her 70s, and I thought it was a wonderful performance, and I went back to tell her, I said, I've heard that song performed by a lot of people. I didn't tell her I was the author, I said, but it takes somebody your age to pull it off. And she went, huh? And I went, oh, you don't even tell a 70-year-old, which I am now, that she's old. She was offended, and I just kind of slunk out and didn't say anything more. But that song, I've looked at life from both sides now. 21 when I wrote it, I took a lot of ridiculing for it. Dave Van Ronk, who was young but was like Burl Ives, he was a young, old-seeming guy, or Gabby Hayes, he could kind of bring was just miscast in it, I think, as a young girl. That I really liked the performance I did in my 50s of it. And my young one, it's too young a girl to pull off that role.
When you did it in 2000, the new version of Both Sides Now, and you sang it an octave down, was that because it's more comfortable to sing it an octave down, or was that to really send the message of the pathos or the feelings involved in that song resonate at a lower verse?
No, it's just that 30 years into my career, my mother told me that she was an alto, that my grandmother was an alto, I was probably an alto. So I've been singing pseudo-soprano, but this disease has eaten my sinuses. About 75, I started going, oh, feels like I've got bubble gum in my horn. Like everything, so, and I have vocal nodes from singing rock and roll. So, no, I used a lot of alto on my first record, and then I used a lot of like real high, from singing along with CSN, like I would sing up there with Graham, like in the razor throat thing,
right.
in the high end. At this point I don't have a soprano voice at all. I used to have 3 octaves, so I didn't know what I was. I just had 3 octaves, I could sing any note I could think. Now I'm just an alto. So I had no choice.
Beyond Both Sides Now, do you still relate to those songs? The songs we'd find on the early records?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, in putting together this ballet, one concept which I abandoned was to do songs of innocence, songs of experience, kind of a Blake thing, in the 2 acts, because it's got an intermission, and to use a lot of the early love songs, and use the younger dancers, like for that. But I opted for a more dramatic thing, and I'm kind of mixing styles together. But I don't go back and listen to them, but the first album is semi-classical. It's almost like Schubert, It isn't folk music. It was kind of mislabeled from the beginning. Folk singers went out, bought it, put it on their turntable and went, what? And the open tunings at that time to give it, it's more like indicated classical arrangements on the guitar. Like it's kind of classical guitar more than folk style guitar. It's not, there's some strummy stuff, And I got a little more strummy for the next 3 records because I was hanging out with strummers, Neil and David and Graham, and I got kind of caught up in that,
And then you do the full band thing by Court and Spark, and
Right.
then you start to move into this amazing transformation of genres into the jazz. And I wanted to just ask you about the Mingus record, because a record I'm quite fond of. But,
thank you.
But a record that you really put yourself out there on in terms of doing what wasn't expected of you. It didn't sell as well.
No.
It got a bit of a critical drubbing.
Yeah, except in Europe where it was more understood, like jazz is.
Tell me about the decision to not take the easy route and make a record like Mingus.
Well, I was warned when Charles approached me. That was Charles's project, not mine. He was approaching me with a very different project. When he found out he was going to die, he told his friend Daniele Sanatori, come over, I want to talk to you about God. And Daniele, who's an Italian film producer, said, oh, you're talking to the wrong person. But he went out and he bought him, what's his name, the quartet, Through the Halls the Women Go, speaking of Michelangelo. Oh, what's that poet's name? Anyway, he read it and he couldn't get anything out of it. So his wife, Sue, who was kind of a literati, she had a magazine that was somewhat literate, I think, in New York, paraphrased it to him. He still didn't get it. So, he was trying to approach to my office, and my office didn't want me to go towards jazz because it was less lucrative. They were still trying to get me to write hits.
Your office being your label?
My office being my managerial company.
Okay.
And they'd warned me. They didn't even tell me who was approaching me. But it came through the grapevine. It went from Sue to a fashion designer who was a friend of an actor, to the actor, to me, that Mingus wanted to make contact. So, through the grapevine. So I made contact, and he had this idea to have an Oxford English voice reading from oh, I almost had the name. I keep thinking E.J. Pratt or E.E. Cummings, but it's not. Anyway, reading the text. And then he said, in the style of the Baptist church, where you have tag team preaching, one preacher preaching the thee, thou text, and the other one saying, the little cat with the bent frame, translating it into the vernacular. So I said, well, gee, if you want to do that, why don't you get John Hendricks? Because he's a master of that. Right. He's the great bebop lyricist, Well, no, he wanted me, and he wanted me to play acoustic guitar. So he liked my acoustic playing. Anyway, I got the book, I read it, and I called him back and said, I could paraphrase the Bible, I could do it with the Bible, but I can't do it with this because, frankly, I don't think there's a lot of meat on it. It's poetry, it's kind of diaphanous, They muddy their waters that they might appear deep. It's like as Nietzsche would say, So then he wrote 6 melodies, and he flattered me. He called me up and he was kind of wry, and he went, I wrote these melodies, and I called them Joni 1, Joni 2, Joni, all the way up to 6, So I thought, well, he's a character. I'll go out and visit him. So I took a flight out, and we kind of hit it off, and we started this project for his album. And he put me in contact with bands, a lot of great players, Chick Corea and Mahavishnu, people, and Stanley Clarke, and a lot of great players. But to me, it was kind of like Bradley's. I can't explain it. It was still retro. It was, and I wasn't confident in myself as a jazz singer. I didn't think, I thought my voice was too clear. When I'd hear it back, it seemed very fledgling, especially against these tracks. But I had my dream band in mind, so I tried all these different takes, which I should put out at some point, because I think I sang better, they were steadier, but I had a concept in mind which was pretty risky. And the players that I got were Wayne and Herbie and Jocko, who are all very innovative players, and Peter Erskine, who was a drummer I'd never worked with before. And I ran it by them, so they did as I instructed, which was an unusual approach at that time, but it would weave me in as a musician because they tended to look at the chirp, they called them, the girl singer is a necessary decorative evil. They weren't considered a musician per se, and I wanted to be woven into it like a textile.
Were you disheartened by the reaction
who?
To that record, Mingus?
No, things conspired. They warned me at my management company, if you do this, you'll be excommunicated from the airwaves, which I was.
The jazzers didn't think you were, thought you were a rocker? The rockers thought you were a jazzer?
The jazzers thought I was taking advantage, not the greats. It's never the greats, because they're risk takers. But the near greats gossip. And they're usually riddled with envy anyway. So there was some complaint among what I would call the less talented, that I was taking advantage of Mingus when I'm Mingus's scribe. I mean, he sent for me. So, but he didn't like that band. That was Miles's band, and he was very competitive with Miles. And he didn't like electronic music. And I thought, oh, here we go again. I went through this in the folk clubs. Pete Seeger cried when Bob Dylan plugged in. All these schools have their perimeters. And they have their uniforms, and they have their laws. It's like...
And there you are traveling through it.
Are you a Catholic, or are you a Baptist, or what are you? Stick to one thing, and I can't. I like
You're an original.
I'm an original.
What did you say earlier? I was cursed with the proclivity for originality or something like that?
Yeah, I'm born the day of the discoverer. I mean, when I found that out, it explained things to me why I'm kind of contemptuous. And Mingus was too. Mingus has got a song called If Charlie Parker Was a Gunslinger, There'd Be a Lot of Dead Copycats.
Well, this is the thing. This
Mingus
whole
and
thing
I
about
clicked.
copycats. Is it realistic, Joni, for a contemporary music artist to not be a copycat of some sort?
Yes, I'm not a copycat. What am I? I'm pretty original. And
what about a new artist today? It just.
I left a lot of half-baked ideas in my work for people to come and finish.
Where's the line? Where's the line between paying?
I just haven't, I'm not saying be like me, please. You know, I'm
Okay.
not trying to start a school. People that have tried to start into my school, I went, oh, woe be to the imitators. Like, if you're going to pile up those many words, Paul Simon tried it, and I went, yikes, and I stopped doing it. You know, like I go, you know, this should not be a school. This is just painter's principles that I'm trying to apply. Don't take that direction. I'm not sure I succeeded with it. It's kind of sounds goofy when I hear it
But
coming
where's the line between learning lessons from our predecessors, our musical heroes, and being a copycat?
Well, tradition is a copycat, and most people love tradition. I'm not saying, you know, like, that's what sells. So please, you know, what I need, I'm not proselytizing what I need. I need, because of my birthday, to discover. Not everybody has that birthday or that need, you know, and most people are perfectly content. And 99.9% of the musicians sat in their room, picked a hero, and emulated it and tried to cop that sound or that this or that, you know. That's not my approach. I approached it like a painter with a painter's need to be an original. And that's not a normal need in music, nor am I saying be like me. I'm not, you know. It means you end up, I'm a mutt, you know. I belong to nothing. There's a great liberty in that, and I'm a freedom freak. But there are times when you wish, you know, when you have no one on your side.
But when you
don't
talk
belong
about
to
someone like
anything.
in 2010 about Dylan, when you have Bob Dylan, you say he's not authentic at all. He's a plagiarist. His name and voice.
Oh, wait, I didn't say that. I didn't say that he's not authentic at all. That is not a word I use. No, see,
That was
that's
from the LA Times.
Yes, okay, that's journalistic bullshit, you know. And, you know, he told me I haven't written a song in years. I said, well, what are you talking about? You know, who's writing them then? He said the box. He just jots down. He came down to craft. You know, inspiration doesn't stay with a lot of artists very long. It's very brief, and then you're in the game, and you got to keep it sustaining it with something, right? You know, you notice it, like One Trick Wonders, you know, 2 good albums and then they peter out. You know, to sustain a gift for a long time is very rare.
Does that make you disappointed in him? Or,
And Dylan?
Yeah.
No, and that remark is completely out of context. The interviewer was an, you know, I went into that thing about the actor, the thing that we've been through here, and he accused me of being unauthentic. Now that's just ignorance. So I'm talking to a guy, how do I explain to this moron whose IQ is somewhere between his shoe size and his knees, and he's misconstruing everything I say. I'm doing this for John Kelly, who's impersonating me. I hate doing interviews with stupid people. This guy's a moron, you know, and I said, and then I got philosophical. Philosophical? I said, yes, philosophical, you know. I said, you do know what philosophy is, don't you? Know, so everything I said, he's calling into question. I can't talk to an adult like that without getting aggravated. They call us exploding morgies. Our nerves are all wrapped around by fibrous things and everything. You know, our nerves are worn thin. You know, we do not want to talk to stupid people, you know, anyone with this disease.
How am I doing?
We're doing fine.
Okay.
But I do get intense though sometimes. But that's the problem. Let's
get off the Dylan. I will ask him he is of your like there's a generation there, and you talked about Leonard and Bob before.
I like a lot of Bob's songs. Musically, he's not very gifted. You know, he's borrowed his voice from old hillbillies. He's got a lot of borrowed things. He's not a great guitar player. You know, he's invented a character to deliver his songs. Sometimes I wish that I could have that character. You know, because, you know, you can do things with that character, you know. It's a mask of sorts, you know, so...
Let me ask you about the common generation, because you wrote Woodstock in '69, a song that defined a generation. A lot of people assumed...
Say.
Well,
So they say.
Yes, they do say that, and it sort of has. And a lot of people assumed you were there, and you weren't. And how did you, in David Crosby's words, capture that moment better than anybody who's actually there?
Because I was one of the many that were thwarted, you know, so that was the place every kid wanted to be. And I got to the airport with CSN and our agent, David Geffen, and our manager, Elliot, on a Sunday night when I was supposed to play, and it was a catastrophe. I had to do the Dick Cavett show the following day. you know, and it was Geffen that decided, oh, we can't get Joni in and we can't get her out in time. So he took me back to the pier where he had a suite, you know, where he lived, and we watched it on TV. And I was the deprived kid that couldn't go. So I wrote it from the point of view of a kid going there. If I'd been there in the back room with all the cutthroat, you know, like egomaniacal crap that goes on backstage, I would not have had that perspective. It's a good thing I didn't go, you know, because I wouldn't have been able to write it from the point of view of a person in attendance.
And if that
I wrote it for a person in attendance and why they wanted to go, because I wasn't allowed by circumstance to attend.
If that song did
So
capture
it was written with empathy.
the spirit, it's beautifully explained. If that did capture the spirit of the generation, you've also been outspoken you've been a critic of that generation.
Yes.
Tell me about your views on the failure of the baby boomers.
Okay. We were raised on Disney. Someday my prince will come. A lot of fairy dream. We came up in affluence, unprecedented. Not that we were greatly wealthy, but we all had houses, even though they were mortgaged. Our mothers had bought into the white picket fence, you know, like a cottage, little modest houses, not like big McMansions like they have big yuppie appetites now, but just a little cottage with some nice garden and, you know, and baby makes 3 or whatever. And they got caught up in competitive, you know, keeping up with the Joneses. The cars took the husbands away. They had a life separate from the housekeeper. When they came home, they were tired. They didn't want to hear about the housewife's problems. And the housewife was always shown smiling and holding up a detergent. You know, it was all about keeping a clean house, and my sheets are cleaner than yours, and my husband's got a newer car than yours, therefore, you know, I'm the most important person on the block. And all that pettiness, and it trickled down into the play of the children. You know, it was culturally rebel without, then out of it came the first seeds, rebel without a cause, you know, and Marlon Brando, you know, like, what are you rebelling against? What have you got? You know, the sickness of the collapse of that dream was vague, you know, but the wives were unhappy. The home contained these, for the most part, these unhappy women.
And it's led to an unhealthy world.
So, when the women are not singing in the kitchen, you've got a sick nation. So whatever it was, the breakdown of that dream, then out of it came, you know, this liberated, spoiled, selfish generation into the costume ball of it, you know, free love, free sex, free music, free. We're so free, you know. And Woodstock was the culmination of it. At that point, our numbers were big enough to constitute a voting bloc. So suddenly, instead of being a minority, we were a viable political community, you know. And then the straights began to grow their hair long and wear the love beads, and I'm going to get a Nero's, you know, I'm going to get a Nero suit for my husband, Martha, you know, and my generation, for the most of the 70s, fell into a state of apathy, sucked their thumb. Heavy drugs followed light drugs. You know, the thing got darker and darker, and they didn't know where to take it. And when the 80s came along and the Reagans got into power, it went hippie, yippee, yuppie. And there was all of the shootings and the beatings and the Democratic Convention with hippies coming this way and cops coming the other and their heads getting bashed in. You know, seeing that America was an ugly, violent place at the governmental and the social structure of it, you know, the pigs and all of that stuff, the violence against this subculture, which was really,
all right,
you know, got it. And they just didn't have another plan. So then they were converted into consumers. Portfolio, play the Wall Street thing, consume. They went right into the thing that their parents had on a bigger scale, and a greedier scale. Make more money. Dallas, you know, like, you know, crooked rich people are good. You know, the Reagans are good. Madonna, I'm a material girl, you know, is good. You know, all of the role models were to the shallow and the acquisitive. And we were converted you know, from some kind of naive idealist. I was not a part of that, you know. I was not a part of the anti-war movement either. I played in Fort Bragg. I went the Bob Hope route, you know, because I had uncles that died in the war, and I thought it was a shame to blame the boys that were drafted.
You were part of the.
I played in Fort Bragg.
Very long,
And I didn't
a
write
long time
protest.
before others. You were aware of environmental destruction, though. You write Big Yellow Taxi
That
before.
was my issue. Nobody was interested in it.
Yeah.
Then they were all hung up on the war and blaming the soldiers. It was dumb. Even Dylan's writing was dumb. I just want you to know I'll spit on your grave. But all the people, yeah, you know, they rally around these things, which, in terms of revolution, just make the people in power snicker.
Turbulent Indigo is not about the songs on that record. I mean, run the gamut from like Sex Kills to there's environmentalism. There is a look at the war. So you then become you're seeing the world in a more political way than
I'm
we're used to.
politically awakened by the personal. I beat City Hall, by the way, in 2 courts. I had a corrupt lawyer. They're all corrupt. They're just fleecing the insurance company. But I lost in the first court, went to the second, and won. And my own lawyer said the judge was stupid. I said, "What do you mean he's stupid?" He said he was a Latino, and he looked at it and he said, "You know, I don't see a case here." I said, "You call that stupid? That's common sense. It's very rare. You know, it's like Alice and the Red Queen. That's an intelligent man. You know, you, on the other hand, are not an intelligent lawyer. Thank God we won." We had a good judge, you know.
Joni, when you were talking about the way you created the conditions where you could call the shots to a certain extent around your own creativity, not just to a certain extent. I mean, to a large extent, you were producing your own records.
There was no producer. You got to get this clear. What I realized, David Crosby, quote unquote, produced my first record. Well, how you could screw up a voice and guitar like that, and all he did was hold chord. You know, it's just awful, that record sonically. It's a shame. It needs to be redone. But of course there's no money for it. But you know, the point is, after that, shouldn't we get a real piano player, man? You know, like, well, wait, you know, I haven't played the piano since I was 8, but I got this idea. Ding, ding, ding. So let me get it up to speed. So by the time you explained what you want, anyway, after that, I went into the second album. They sent in a hotshot producer, Rothschild, who was doing the Doors. What he put me through on that one, which is the old producer thing, constant coitus interruptus. I'm singing with my eyes closed, and he bursts in like God and goes, "No." So you're being hammered with negativity. You know, you've swayed off your mic, or you've done this or everything. And when he was finished, he looked at his watch and said, "Well, I have to go and do the Doors. You know, I'll be back in 2 weeks." He left. I said to the engineer, "Henry, you know, it was my first encounter. Do you think we could get this record finished in 2 weeks before he gets back? Because if this, he'll make me hate music." After this one day, I hate music. He's making me hate music, you know. My love of it was killed at 8 by a woman that hit me with a ruler for composing, you know. And it went underground for 10 years. It's a delicate thing. So we had the record done. Wasn't that good because, you know, but we did 13 records together, Henry and I.
But I guess my question...
With no producer.
Okay, so, but in terms of really maintaining a sense of your creativity, you did the artwork. You're very powerfully determining what the music is going to be on the records. But nobody's parachuted in to write the stuff for you or tell you what to do.
Nobody stands over you when you're painting.
Do you feel
tells
like...
you where to put your brush.
Well, do you feel then, and especially doing this all as a woman too, and what you just talked about in terms of your contract that then Neil and others followed in your footsteps, do you accept that you were a pioneer?
Oh yeah, sure. Oh, I blazed a lot of trails. Self-publishing, a lot.
And a lot of that as a woman, but you don't like to be called a feminist, correct?
No, I'm not a feminist.
And where's that line for you?
I don't want to get a posse against men. I'd rather go toe-to-toe myself. Work it out.
before I let you go
Yeah.
and finally be rid of me, let me ask you a bit about where you are now, where you're at now. You have a milestone birthday this year, turning 70.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about aging?
Oh, I'm fine with it as long as I can be healthy. I don't mind the aging. It's hard to tell at this age what is age decline and what is the disease. You know, I'm always asking my doctor, you know, do old people do this? Is that the disease or is that, you know, in other words, can I fight it or do I have to accept it? What can I fight and what can I accept? So that's my battle at this time is, you know, just trying to enter into old age, which is a decline of certain things, but also there's a liberty to it, which I feel it is kind of like second childhood, only not that you're childish necessarily. It's just that I saw a monarch butterfly go by the other day. Well, I'm always kind of thrilled by little things like that anyway. I've never lost that wonder and delight at things like that.
Are you someone who's preoccupied by mortality?
By immortality?
By mortality.
Oh, God, no. I mean, I've faced death so many times. No. No,
Doesn't freak you
Salvador
out.
Dali was. You know, that's what he was doing, all that commercial stuff to be hibernated. No. No, I'm very good with death. I mean, all my animals have died, some of them in my arms. Birds have died in my, you know, started with birds. I was introduced to death. A bird came to me to die that was mauled by a cat, and then another bird that hit the spray came
What
to me
about
to
your
die.
own mortality? When you say you face
I don't want to die yet.
Are you freaked out by it?
No. You know, I just don't, I want more time. It's as simple as that. So, you know, I don't want to go yet. I've got a lot of things still that I want to accomplish and you know, and savor, you know. No, not at all.
Well, there's a lot of things that we want you to accomplish because I know you're, and you've got lots of time to do it. I know you're working on a memoir. You're working on a book of poetry.
No.
No? There isn't some poetry you're working on?
There's a book that came out of my songs, just came out, called Gathered Light, where, you know, again, you know, I've been kicked out of every school of music that there is, you know, and also I've been kind of withheld as a poet because I sang it, right? So, whereas Leonard is considered a poet, you know, and Dylan is considered, and even Jim Morrison, God knows why, is considered a poet, but
Because he called himself a poet.
maybe, but they go, well, she thinks she's a poet, or she was the most poetic among them, or something. So there's always this perverse withholding of this thing. So a book came out that promised to it's all full of poets. It promised inclusion. Some of them are nice, but for the most part, I realize I never liked poetry. So whatever it is that I do, to me, poetry. Nietzsche on the poets was very accurate, you know. Did you ever read Zarathustra, Zarathustra?
No.
Zarathustra? The poet, well, here's a kind of in a nutshell. The poet is the vainest of the vain. Even before the ugliest of water buffalo doth he fan his tail. I've looked among them for an honest man, and all I've dredged up are old God's heads, old God's heads. Here's a good one. He muddies his waters that he might appear deep. Well, so the academic poets in this book, they're digging under my lines, like looking for hidden meaning and slapping themselves on the back going, I think I'm onto something here. So poetry is obviously mistaught at the level of higher education. It was mistaught in the school system, you know, and to me it was like eating sunflower seeds with your fingertips, you know, for all that effort to crack this thing, you get this piddly little nugget, you know, like, I mean, and Nietzsche felt like that about it, you know, and even Shakespeare, who I love, like soliloquies and stuff, they're rich, you know, regardless of whether he stole it or where he collected, he rounded up great thought and did it in a very artful way, you know. But his sonnets, I can smell the money in them. Like he's got, I don't know how many sonnets about, you're so beautiful that you should reproduce yourself and I'm the guy to do it. You know, and I think, okay, he wrote one. Some guy said, I'm hustling this girl. Would you write me one like you wrote for John?
Even Shakespeare's a copycat.
Yeah, I mean, oh, you did that for money, Willie, and you did that for money, you know.
What about performance? Let's come full circle to where we started with this interview. This Illuminato Festival. Are you going to get on stage?
I guess I'm going to do something kind of. I can't sing. There's no point. There's no. My singing is probably permanently gone.
Really?
You know. Well, it would just. Yeah, you have to know when to quit. You know, I mean, I had an instrument that I can control, and I don't have an instrument that I can control now. You know, basically because of the illness. And even though I'm getting better, and it's getting a little better, it's still very impaired. In the planes, in the sinuses, like you have all these planes that you bounce notes off. Well, if I'm bouncing, you know, it could ricochet. I can't control it like I used to, and I used to have very good intonation. So, you know.
So you're going to do a poem?
So I can still talk. So I have a poem which I haven't been able to set to music because I can't sing. So I'm going to try talking it down. Doing something, but I'm going to do it with Brian. I'm going to try it with Brian and this trumpet player that I like. So I don't know what it's going to evolve into. Maybe I'll sing a couple of notes. Because it's frustrating. With the singing, I could put the correct emphasis on certain words by hitting the notes. I could put emphasis that I can't with speaking it. It's lacking to me something just to speak it that I miss. But you know, Jorn seemed to think, and Rufus, that it communicated, so they've encouraged me to do this thing.
I think that'll be really exciting for a lot of people. This has been such a pleasure. Before we end this, I have to ask you, we've talked so much about all of what you've done throughout your career, or a lot of what you've done throughout your career, your tremendous creativity, the tremendous success you've had as defined by yourself and as defined by others, your fans, critics, etc. What are you most proud of, Joni? What do you look back and go, that is what I'm really proud of?
Well, there isn't anything singular, you know. There's healthy pride and unhealthy pride. I try not to indulge too much in pride, but you know, there are cases, man, in the street where people come up that it's really meant a lot to them. Like, for instance, what first comes to mind here is two young girls who lost their mother in their early teens, who holed up in their bedroom with this music. And it was cathartic, and I kind of surrogate mothered them, you know. And there are people like, where did I read? The woman that plays in The Sopranos,
Edie Falco.
The bosses, she said that I raised her. So there are these strange things out there. Well, there is experiential exchange in the work, you know, that to a young person, I think is valuable. There's one thing that I've been trying to bring across to people, I think, is you're on your own, let's face it. You know, like, and that's okay. You know, and that's kind of Nietzsche, that's what Nietzsche's Überman was all about. It's kind of a different approach to a similar idea, you know, to remove the crutches.
It's a little scary.
It is for most people. You know, for me, it just kind of happened. I didn't have anybody guiding me. They just removed themselves because I've had a very interesting and a very challenging life, you know. Like I say, like a lot of battles, just disease after disease after. I mean, I shouldn't be here, you know. But I have a tremendous will to live, and a tremendous joie de vivre, you know, alternating, you know, with irritability. Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, thank you. Thank you for inviting us into your home.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time. It's been an absolute joy.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Nice
to meet you.
Thank you.
Was that okay?